She stared at the divorce papers scattered across the marble floor, her hand instinctively protecting the life growing within her, never knowing that in 3 months, she'd be signing a deal that would make her husband's fortune look like pocket change. Before we start this story, tell us where you are watching from in the comment below, and make sure you subscribe for more outstanding stories. Now let's begin. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors where Amara sat in stunned silence. The divorce papers lay scattered around her like fallen leaves, each page a testament to the end of what she'd believed was her forever. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against her still flat stomach, where a 12-week-old secret grew. A secret she'd planned to share with her husband Richard over breakfast. Instead, she'd found him packing his belongings into leather suitcases, his face cold and distant as he explained that their marriage had been a mistake from the beginning. "You're not the woman I thought I married," Richard had said, his words cutting through her like glass. "Victoria understands my world. She fits." Victoria Ashford, the socialite with the perfect pedigree, the one who'd been circling their marriage like a vulture for months. Amara had seen the signs but chosen to ignore them, believing that love would be enough to weather any storm. Now, as she listened to Richard's footsteps echoing through their once shared home, she wondered if she'd ever truly known the man she'd married 3 years ago. The man who'd swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of a future where her dreams mattered as much as his empire. The sound of the front door closing reverberated through the penthouse like a gunshot, final and devastating. Amara was alone, truly alone, for the first time in years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city below and the soft ticking of the antique clock Richard's mother had given them as a wedding gift. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. The world continued its relentless pace below, joggers, dog walkers, children playing, all oblivious to the fact that her entire universe had just imploded. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. A text from her best friend Maya. "Coffee later? I have news." Amara stared at the message, unable to formulate a response. How could she explain that her husband had just walked out on her and their unborn child? That the man she'd trusted with her heart had deemed her unworthy of his future? The apartment felt impossibly large now, each room a monument to a life that no longer existed. She wandered through the spaces that had once felt like home, noting how little of herself remained. Richard had always preferred minimalism, clean lines, neutral colors. Her attempts to add warmth, a colorful throw pillow here, a family photo there, had been met with subtle disapproval until she'd learned to suppress her own preferences. In the bedroom, she found one of her art pieces propped against the wall, a vibrant canvas she'd painted during their honeymoon in Santorini. It had never made it to the wall. Richard had said it didn't fit the aesthetic. Looking at it now, she saw it for what it was, a piece of her soul that she'd allowed to be silenced. The irony wasn't lost on her. Richard Morrison, the pharmaceutical mogul worth hundreds of millions, had discarded her like a failed investment. He'd never bothered to ask about her own dreams, her own potential. To him, she'd been an accessory, beautiful enough to enhance his image, but ultimately replaceable. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Amara had been quietly working on something extraordinary. For the past year, she'd been developing a revolutionary water purification system, a passion project born from her engineering background that Richard had dismissed as a hobby. The prototype sat in her small home office, a room Richard rarely entered, surrounded by sketches and research that represented months of meticulous work. Her phone rang, startling her from her reverie. An unknown international number. She almost declined, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Morrison? This is Khalil Al-Rashid. I believe we have a meeting scheduled this afternoon." The voice was smooth, accented, professional. Amara's heart nearly stopped. She'd forgotten about the meeting, a consultation about her water purification system that Maya had arranged through her connections in the art world. Maya had mentioned that a prominent businessman from Dubai was interested in environmental technologies. Yes, of course, Amara managed, her voice hoarse from crying. Though I should mention, there have been some personal circumstances that have arisen. I'm sorry to hear that. Would you prefer to reschedule? There was something in his tone, not pity, but understanding, as if he knew what it meant to have one's world turned upside down. No, Amara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. No, I'll be there. What do you think drives someone to pursue their dreams, even in their darkest moments? Share your thoughts below. 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Dubai marina, Prince Khalil al-Rashid set down his phone and stared out at the pristine waters of the Persian Gulf. There had been something in the woman's voice, a fragility that spoke of recent wounds, but also an underlying strength that intrigued him. At 34, Khalil had built an empire that spanned continents, transforming his family's oil wealth into a diversified portfolio of technology companies, real estate ventures, and humanitarian initiatives. But success had come at a cost. Every relationship in his life had been tainted by questions of motivation. Did they want him or his wealth? Love, he'd learned, was a luxury he couldn't afford. His assistant, Nadia, appeared in the doorway with her usual efficiency. Your car is ready for the airport, Your Highness. The New York meetings are confirmed for tomorrow. Thank you, Nadia. And please, have our security team conduct a discreet background check on Amara Morrison. I want to know who I'm dealing with. Of course, sir. Might I ask why this particular meeting is so important? We receive hundreds of technology proposals each month. Khalil turned from the window, his dark eyes thoughtful. Sometimes, Nadia, the most valuable opportunities come from the most unexpected places. This woman, there was something different about her voice. Desperate, yes, but not defeated. In my experience, that combination often produces remarkable results. As his motorcade wound through the streets of Dubai toward the airport, Khalil couldn't shake the feeling that this trip to New York would be different from the countless others. He'd built his fortune on instincts as much as analysis, and every instinct told him that Amara Morrison was about to change everything. The plane's engines hummed as they lifted off into the desert sky, carrying him toward a meeting that would alter the course of 2 lives forever. In his briefcase lay preliminary reports on a water purification system that could revolutionize access to clean water in developing regions, a technology that aligned perfectly with his humanitarian goals. What he didn't know was that the woman behind the innovation was fighting the battle of her life, that her world had just collapsed, and that she was about to discover strength she never knew she possessed. As the lights of Dubai faded below, Khalil closed his eyes and tried to push away the memory of another woman's voice, another betrayal that had taught him to guard his heart like a fortress. But something about tomorrow's meeting felt different, like the beginning of a story that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the courage to begin again. The glass towers of Manhattan stretched toward a steel-gray sky as Amara stood before the mirror in the hotel lobby restroom, trying to compose herself. Her eyes were still red-rimmed from crying, but she'd managed to conceal the worst of it with makeup. The black business suit she'd chosen felt like armor, professional, competent, hiding the chaos beneath. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick, the simple act requiring more concentration than it should have. Everything felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. This morning she'd been a wife. Now she was what? A single mother-to-be with a prototype and a dream. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. Each floor that passed brought her closer to a meeting that could change everything, or could be just another dead end. She'd faced rejection before. Richard had made sure of that, dismissing her ideas with patronizing smiles and gentle redirections toward more suitable activities. But this was different. This was her chance to prove that she was more than just a discarded wife, that her mind and her innovations had value beyond what any man decided to assign them. The elevator doors opened to reveal a minimalist reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A woman in an elegant hijab smiled warmly from behind a curved desk. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Nadia Kasim, Prince Khalil's assistant. He's just finishing a call, but he'll be with you momentarily. Can I offer you some tea or coffee?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Amara replied, grateful for the few extra minutes to steady her nerves. As Nadia prepared the tea, Amara found herself studying the artwork on the walls, a collection of photographs showcasing water projects around the world. Children drinking from new wells, families celebrating the arrival of clean water systems, engineers working alongside local communities. Each image told a story of transformation, of lives changed by access to something as fundamental as clean water. "Beautiful, aren't they?" a voice said behind her. Amara turned and felt her breath catch. The man standing in the doorway was nothing like she'd expected. Tall and lean with olive skin and dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. His suit was perfectly tailored, but it was his presence that filled the room, magnetic, intense, yet somehow gentle. "Prince Khalil," she managed, extending her hand. "I'm Amara Morrison. Thank you for meeting with me." He took her hand in both of his, a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. "Please, just Khalil. And the pleasure is mine. I've been looking forward to this conversation." His accent was subtle, refined, and when he smiled, something in her chest loosened for the first time in hours. There was no judgment in his eyes, no calculation, just genuine interest and something that looked almost like understanding. "Shall we?" He gestured toward his office, and Amara followed, acutely aware of how her world had already begun to shift. His office was a study in contrasts, modern glass and steel softened by rich Persian rugs and carefully chosen artifacts. A large photograph dominated one wall, a young girl in a refugee camp, her eyes bright with hope as she drank from a cup of clean water. "She's beautiful," Amara said, drawn to the image. "Her name is Layla. That photograph was taken at a camp in Jordan, just after we installed our first water purification system there. She was 8 years old and had never tasted clean water before that day." His voice carried a weight of emotion that surprised her. "She's 14 now, attending university on a scholarship we provide. Water gave her a future." Amara felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from recognition. This was why she'd started her project, why she'd spent countless nights in her small office, dreaming of solutions to problems that seemed too big for one person to solve. "I understand," she said quietly. "That's why I created this." She opened her briefcase with trembling hands, revealing a sleek device about the size of a laptop. But it wasn't the technology that captured Khalil's attention. It was the passion that lit up her face as she began to explain. "Traditional water purification systems are expensive, require constant maintenance, and often break down in remote areas," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But this uses a combination of solar power, advanced filtration, and a self-cleaning mechanism that can operate for years without technical support. It can purify up to 500 gallons of water per day, enough for a small community." Khalil leaned forward, his business instincts fully engaged. "The maintenance issue is crucial. How did you solve it?" For the next hour, Amara forgot about divorce papers and broken hearts. She forgot about Richard's dismissive comments and her own shattered confidence. She was in her element, explaining the intricate details of her innovation, answering Khalil's increasingly technical questions with growing excitement. "The genius is in the simplicity," she explained, her hands animated as she spoke. Local communities can understand and maintain it themselves. It's not just about providing clean water, it's about empowering people to sustain their own solutions. Khalil watched her transform before his eyes. The fragile woman who'd entered his office had become a fierce advocate for change, her intelligence blazing like a beacon. When she smiled while explaining a particularly clever engineering solution, something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. "This is remarkable," he said finally. "Truly remarkable. The applications are limitless: refugee camps, rural communities, disaster relief." He paused, studying her face. "But I have to ask, why are you here alone? An innovation of this magnitude should have teams of investors beating down your door." The question hit like a physical blow. Amara's confident facade cracked, and for a moment she was back in the penthouse, staring at divorce papers scattered across marble floors. She began, then stopped, struggling to find words that wouldn't reveal too much. "My circumstances changed recently, dramatically, and I realized that I need to do this on my own." Khalil's expression softened. He'd seen that look before, the careful mask that people wore when their world had been turned upside down. Without knowing the details, he understood that she was running from something or someone. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's fine. It's just that this morning, I thought I knew what my life looked like. And now," she gestured helplessly, then caught herself. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I believe this technology can change lives, and I think you might be the person who can help me make that happen." The vulnerability in her voice was devastating. Khalil found himself wanting to protect her, to shield her from whatever had put that pain in her eyes. The feeling was foreign and dangerous. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and this woman was threatening to tear them down in a single afternoon. "Tell me about the production costs," he said, forcing himself back to safer ground. As they delved deeper into the technical and financial aspects, something electric began to build in the room. They weren't just discussing business. They were connecting on a level that transcended mere professional interest. When their hands accidentally touched as they examined the prototype, both felt a jolt of recognition, as if they'd been waiting their entire lives for this moment. "The initial investment would be significant," Khalil said finally. "But the potential impact—" He trailed off, lost in thought. "I know it's a risk," Amara said quickly. "And I know my circumstances aren't ideal. But I believe in this technology. I believe it can save lives." Khalil stood and walked to the window, his mind racing. Every rational part of him said to be cautious, to have his team conduct extensive due diligence before making any commitments. But there was something about this woman, her passion, her resilience, her refusal to let circumstances define her, that called to something deeper than business sense. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, turning back to face her. "Amara, I want to make you an offer." Her heart stopped. "An offer? I want to fund your project. Full development, testing, and initial production. But more than that, I want to be your partner in this. Not just financially, but personally. I want to see this technology reach the people who need it most." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Amara felt the world tilt on its axis. Everything she'd thought she knew about her future suddenly rewritten by this man with dark eyes and an understanding heart. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Khalil said simply. "Say yes to changing the world. Say yes to believing in yourself. Say yes to the possibility that sometimes the worst days of our lives can lead to the best ones." Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted. This wasn't just about water purification technology or business partnerships. This was about two wounded souls recognizing something in each other that they'd thought was lost forever. "Yes," Amara said, her voice barely audible. Yes, I'll say yes. As Khalil walked toward her, extending his hand to seal their agreement, neither of them realized that 3,000 miles away, Richard Morrison was announcing his engagement to Victoria Ashford at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant, completely unaware that his discarded wife was about to become one of the most powerful women in environmental technology. The handshake lasted longer than it should have, their palms warm against each other, their eyes locked in a moment of understanding that transcended words. When they finally broke apart, both knew that everything had changed. What do you think happens when two people meant to heal each other's wounds finally meet? Share your thoughts about second chances below. I should warn you, Khalil said softly. I'm not an easy man to work with. I have very high standards. Good, Amara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. So do I. Something passed between them, a recognition, a challenge, a promise. The broken woman who'd entered his office was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to remember her own strength. And the guarded prince who'd built walls around his heart was starting to wonder if it might be time to let someone in. Outside the window, the city pulsed with life and possibility. Inside the office, two people who'd thought they were too damaged to love again were taking the first tentative steps toward healing, together. The black sedan glided through Manhattan traffic as Amara stared out the window, her mind reeling from the afternoon's events. The signed partnership agreement sat in her briefcase, a document that would change her life forever. Khalil had insisted on a $50 million initial investment, with provisions for additional funding as needed. Numbers that would have seemed impossible just hours ago were now her reality. But it wasn't the money that had her hands trembling. It was the way Khalil had looked at her when they'd shaken hands, the electric current that had passed between them, the dangerous feeling that she was teetering on the edge of something that could destroy what little stability she had left. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How did it go? Coffee tomorrow. Amara stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could she explain that in the span of one afternoon, she'd gone from abandoned wife to potential millionaire? That a man she'd just met had seen something in her that her own husband had missed? That she was terrified of the feelings stirring in her chest? It went well. Very well. I'll call you later, she typed back, then immediately regretted the vague response. But she wasn't ready to put any of this into words yet. The sedan pulled up to the penthouse building, and Amara's stomach lurched. She'd have to face the empty apartment, the scattered remnants of her marriage, the reality of what came next. The doorman nodded respectfully as she passed, his expression carefully neutral. No doubt he'd witnessed Richard's departure earlier. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt like ascending to a tomb. Each floor that passed reminded her of the descent from her earlier trip to meet Khalil, when she'd been broken and desperate. Now she was returning transformed, but somehow the victory felt hollow. The penthouse was exactly as she'd left it. Divorce papers still scattered across the marble floor, Richard's absence echoing in every corner. But something had changed. The space no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a way station, a place she was already beginning to leave behind. She walked to her small office, the room Richard had grudgingly allowed her to use for her hobby. The prototype was still there, surrounded by months of research and development. But now it wasn't just a dream. It was the foundation of a partnership that could change everything. Her phone rang. An unknown number, but she recognized the international prefix. Amara, it's Khalil. I hope I'm not calling too late. His voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. No, not at all. I was just processing everything. I wanted to make sure you were all right. You seemed overwhelmed when you left. The concern in his voice was dangerous. It made her want to lean into it, to trust someone again. But trust had led her to this empty penthouse, to divorce papers on marble floors, to the crushing realization that she'd been living a lie. I'm fine, she said, the words coming out sharper than she'd intended. Just tired. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Amara, I hope you know that our partnership is based solely on the merit of your technology. I don't want you to feel pressured or— I don't, she interrupted, then immediately felt guilty for the lie. Because the truth was she did feel pressured, not by him, but by her own traitorous heart that was already starting to imagine possibilities that terrified her. Good. Because I want you to know that I have very strict policies about mixing business with personal matters. This partnership is professional, nothing more. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a slap. Had she misread the connection between them? Had she imagined the way his eyes had lingered on her face, the electric charge when their hands had touched? Of course, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I wouldn't expect anything else. Excellent. I'll have my legal team prepare the detailed contracts. We should plan to meet again next week to discuss the implementation timeline. Next week. The thought of seeing him again so soon made her pulse quicken. Unless that's too soon? I know you have personal matters to handle. Personal matters. Such a clinical way to describe the wreckage of her marriage. No, next week is fine. I'll be ready. After they hung up, Amara stood in her office, staring at the prototype that had just become her ticket to independence. But independence felt cold and lonely, nothing like the warmth she'd experienced in Khalil's presence. She tried to push the feeling away, to focus on the practical aspects of their arrangement, but her mind kept drifting to the way he'd said her name, the genuine concern in his voice. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You're vulnerable right now. You're confusing gratitude with attraction. He's a business partner, nothing more. But even as she tried to convince herself, she knew it was a lie. 3 floors above the Dubai Marina, Khalil stood on his penthouse balcony, the warm night air carrying the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. The city sparkled like scattered diamonds, but his mind was 3,000 miles away, replaying every moment of his afternoon with Amara Morrison. She was nothing like the women in his usual orbit, the socialites and business associates who saw him as a means to an end. There had been something raw and genuine about her, a vulnerability that called to parts of himself he'd thought were dead and buried. But vulnerability was dangerous. It had been 3 years since Layla had betrayed him, selling his business secrets to competitors while professing her love. 3 years since he'd learned that his wealth made him a target, that every declaration of affection came with hidden motives. His phone buzzed with a text from his cousin Omar. Heard you're in New York. Business or pleasure? Khalil stared at the message, unsure how to respond. What was it about Amara that made him question everything he thought he knew about protecting himself? Business, he typed back, then immediately deleted it. Both, he wrote, then deleted that too. Finally, he settled on. Complicated. Omar's response was immediate. The best things usually are. Just remember what happened last time you let someone get too close. The warning hit its mark. Khalil had spent years building walls around his heart, creating a fortress of professional success and emotional distance. Amara Morrison, with her brilliant mind and wounded eyes, threatened to tear down everything he'd built to protect himself. He thought about the call he'd just made, the way he'd insisted on keeping things professional. It had been the right thing to do, for both of them. She was clearly dealing with her own emotional trauma, and he had no business complicating her life with his own damaged heart. But even as he rationalized his decision, he couldn't shake the memory of how she'd looked when explaining her technology, passionate, alive, completely captivating. Or the way her hand had felt in his, warm and surprisingly strong. His assistant Nadia appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. Your Highness, you've been standing out here for over an hour. Is everything all right? Just thinking, Khalil replied, not turning from the view. Nadia, what do you know about mixing business with personal relationships? That it's usually a recipe for disaster, she said without hesitation. Why do you ask? No reason. Just curious. But Nadia had worked for him for 5 years, and she knew him better than most. This is about the Morrison woman, isn't it? The one with the water purification system. Khalil finally turned to face her. What makes you say that? Because I've never seen you make a $50 million investment decision in a single afternoon. Because you insisted on handling the contract negotiations personally instead of delegating to the legal team. And because you've been different since you got back from that meeting, distracted, unsettled. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. She's brilliant, Nadia. Her technology could save millions of lives. I'm sure it could. But that's not why you're standing on this balcony looking like a man wrestling with his conscience. Khalil sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. She's been hurt recently. Badly. The last thing she needs is to get involved with someone like me. Someone like you? Someone whose every relationship has been tainted by questions of money and power. Someone who's forgotten how to trust. Someone who could hurt her even more than she's already been hurt. Nadia studied his face with the keen insight of someone who'd watched him navigate the treacherous waters of wealth and power. Or someone who could help her heal, if he was brave enough to try. I'm not brave, Nadia. I'm careful. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're so afraid of being hurt again that you're willing to hurt someone else first. The words stung because they were true. Khalil had become an expert at emotional self-preservation, at keeping people at arm's length to protect himself from the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. But what if, in protecting himself, he was missing something extraordinary? She deserves better than someone who's afraid to trust, he said finally. Maybe. Or maybe she deserves someone who understands what it means to be broken and is willing to risk everything to become whole again. After Nadia left, Khalil remained on the balcony, wrestling with feelings he'd sworn never to experience again. Amara Morrison was dangerous, not because she was calculating or manipulative, but because she was genuine. Because when she looked at him, he saw not the wealthy prince or the successful businessman, but simply a man who might be worthy of trust. And that terrified him more than any business deal ever could. What do you think is more dangerous? Loving someone who might hurt you, or never loving at all? Share your thoughts about taking emotional risks below. Back in New York, Amara sat at her kitchen island, staring at the partnership agreement that would change her life forever. The financial terms were more generous than she dared to hope, but it was the personal clauses that caught her attention. Provisions for regular meetings, collaborative decision-making, shared oversight of the project's humanitarian applications. She'd be working closely with Khalil for months, possibly years. The thought should have excited her. After all, this was her dream come true. But instead, it filled her with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Her laptop chimed with an email from Richard's lawyer, a cold, clinical message about dividing assets and finalizing the divorce proceedings. The contrast was stark, her husband's attorney treating her like a business transaction to be closed, while a man she'd just met was offering her the chance to change the world. She closed the laptop without responding and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. Somewhere in the city below, people were living their lives, taking risks, opening their hearts despite the possibility of pain. When had she become so afraid of feeling anything? Her phone buzzed with another text from Maya. Okay, I'm officially worried. Call me. Amara stared at the message, then impulsively hit the call button. Finally, Maya's voice was filled with relief. I was about to come over there and stage an intervention. How did the meeting go? It went well. Better than well. He's going to fund the project. That's amazing. Amara, this is everything you've been working toward. You should be celebrating. I should be, Amara agreed, but her voice lacked conviction. But you're not. What's wrong? And don't tell me nothing. I can hear it in your voice. Amara closed her eyes, trying to find the words. He's complicated, Maya. The investor. There's something about him that makes me feel. Feel what? Like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and I don't know if I'm about to fly or fall. Maya was quiet for a moment. Is he married? No. At least, I don't think so. Maya, it doesn't matter. Richard left me this morning. This morning. I'm in no position to be thinking about another man. Honey, your marriage has been over for months. You've just been too loyal to admit it. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what you want instead of what you think you should want. What I want is to focus on my work, on building something meaningful, on proving that I'm more than just someone's discarded wife. And what if you could have both? What if you could build something meaningful and find someone who sees your worth? The question hit too close to home, because for a few precious hours that afternoon, Khalil had made her feel valuable, brilliant, capable of changing the world. The feeling had been intoxicating and terrifying. I can't afford to be wrong about someone again, Amara said quietly. Not now. Not when I'm finally getting my life back. Or maybe you can't afford to be right about someone and walk away anyway. After they hung up, Amara returned to her office and pulled out her sketches and research notes. Work had always been her refuge, the place where she could lose herself in problems that had solutions. But tonight, even her beloved project couldn't quiet the voice in her head that whispered dangerous possibilities. She thought about the way Khalil had looked at her when she'd explained her technology, the genuine interest in his dark eyes. She thought about his insistence on keeping things professional and wondered if he was as afraid of the connection between them as she was. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to maintain strict boundaries, to treat him as nothing more than a business partner, to focus on the work and ignore the way her heart raced when she thought about seeing him again. But as she sat in her quiet office, surrounded by the remnants of her old life and the promise of something new, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes the smart thing and the right thing were two very different choices. And for the first time in years, she found herself wondering if she had the courage to choose the right thing, even if it meant risking everything she'd worked to rebuild. The crisis began at 3:47 a.m. Dubai time with an urgent call that shattered Khalil's restless sleep. His phone buzzed insistently against the marble nightstand, displaying Nadia's number, a call that could only mean emergency. Your Highness, I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a situation. Nadia's voice was tense, professional urgency cutting through the early morning stillness. There's been an explosion at the Kaladia water treatment facility. No casualties, thank God, but the entire system is compromised. We have 40,000 people without clean water, and the government is demanding immediate solutions. Khalil was already moving, his mind shifting into crisis mode. What caused it? Preliminary reports suggest equipment failure, but we won't know for certain until the investigation is complete. Sir, the media is already calling this a failure of our technology. If we don't respond quickly, the implications were staggering, not just for his reputation, but for the thousands of families who depended on that facility for survival. Cancel all my meetings. I need to be on a plane to Abu Dhabi within the hour. Already arranged. But sir, there's something else. The engineering team is suggesting we consult with external experts, specifically specialists in emergency water purification systems. Given the timeline and the stakes, Khalil paused in the act of pulling on his clothes. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Mrs. Morrison's technology is designed for exactly this type of emergency deployment. Portable, solar-powered, immediate implementation. Sir, her system could provide clean water for those affected within days instead of months. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman he'd been trying to keep at professional distance had become his potential salvation. Make the call. In New York, Amara jolted awake to her phone ringing at 10:15 p.m. She'd fallen asleep on her couch, surrounded by technical specifications and business plans. The partnership agreement still spread across her coffee table like a map to an uncertain future. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Nadia Kasim, Prince Khalil's assistant. I apologize for the late hour, but we have an emergency situation that requires your immediate expertise." Sleep vanished instantly. "What kind of emergency?" "A water treatment facility in the UAE has suffered catastrophic failure. 40,000 people are without access to clean water, and conventional repair could take months. Prince Khalil believes your technology could provide an immediate solution." Amara's engineering mind immediately began calculating logistics. "How immediate?" "He needs you on a plane to Dubai tonight." "Mrs. Morrison, I know this is sudden, but lives are at stake." The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. This wasn't about business partnerships or personal complications. This was about everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed her technology could accomplish. "I'll be ready in 2 hours," she said without hesitation. "Excellent. A car will collect you at midnight." "Mrs. Morrison, Prince Khalil asked me to tell you that if your system works in these conditions, it could revolutionize emergency response worldwide." After hanging up, Amara stood in her empty penthouse, the magnitude of what was happening finally hitting her. In a matter of hours, she'd be halfway around the world, working alongside Khalil to solve a crisis that could prove, or destroy, everything she'd built. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't what we planned, but I can't think of anyone I'd rather have with me in a crisis. K." The message sent warmth flooding through her chest, followed immediately by panic. Working together in a boardroom was one thing. Being trapped together in a high-stakes emergency was something else entirely. But 40,000 people needed clean water, and she was the only one who might be able to provide it. The private jet hummed through the darkness above the Atlantic, its cabin bathed in the soft glow of reading lights and laptop screens. Amara sat across from Khalil at a polished conference table, technical drawings and emergency protocols spread between them like a bridge connecting their separate worlds. They'd been in the air for 6 hours, and the forced proximity was doing dangerous things to her resolve. Here, removed from the familiar boundaries of offices and schedules, Khalil was different, more intense, more focused, but also more human. She'd watched him field calls from government officials and humanitarian organizations, his voice steady and commanding even as worry creased his features. "The latest reports show water reserves depleting faster than expected," he said, ending another call with the crisis management team. "We have maybe 3 days before the situation becomes critical." Amara looked up from her calculations. "My system can be deployed in 12 hours once we arrive. But Khalil, you need to understand, this will be the largest field test we've ever attempted. If something goes wrong, then 40,000 people continue to suffer while we wait for conventional solutions that may be months away." His dark eyes met hers across the table. "Amara, I've seen your work. I've studied every specification, every test result. If anyone can make this work, it's you." The faith in his voice was overwhelming. When had anyone ever believed in her capabilities so completely? "You're asking me to stake my entire career on an untested deployment." "No," Khalil said quietly. "I'm asking you to save lives. The rest is just details." Something shifted in the space between them. This wasn't about business anymore, or professional partnerships, or careful boundaries. This was about 2 people who shared a vision of what was possible, facing a challenge that would test everything they'd built, separately and together. "Tell me about the facility," Amara said, pulling out her tablet. "I need to understand the exact failure points." For the next 2 hours, they worked with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. Khalil's knowledge of local conditions combined with Amara's technical expertise created a synergy that surprised them both. They finished each other's thoughts, anticipated each other's questions, moved through complex problems with the fluid coordination of a team that had worked together for years. "Here," Amara said, sketching rapidly on her tablet. "If we set up the primary units here and here, with secondary systems as backup, we can create overlapping coverage zones. The solar arrays can be positioned to maximize exposure while the filtration systems process water from the existing infrastructure." Khalil leaned closer to study her design, his shoulder brushing against hers. The contact was electric, sending awareness racing through her body. She caught her breath, suddenly hyper-aware of his proximity, the warmth of his skin, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his presence seemed to fill all the empty spaces around her. "It's brilliant," he said softly, but when she looked up, his eyes weren't on the tablet. They were on her face, dark and intense, and filled with something that made her heart race. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cabin around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for one of them to acknowledge what was building between them. Amara felt herself leaning closer, drawn by a pull she couldn't resist. Then turbulence hit, jolting them apart. The moment shattered, leaving them staring at each other across a suddenly vast distance. "We should," Khalil began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "We should try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." "Yes," Amara agreed, her voice slightly breathless. "Rest. Good idea." But as she settled into the cabin's comfortable sleeping area, rest was the last thing on her mind. The memory of Khalil's eyes, the almost moment between them, played on repeat in her thoughts. She was supposed to be keeping things professional, protecting her wounded heart, focusing on the work. Instead, she was falling for a man who lived half a world away, whose life was so different from hers they might as well be from different planets. A man who'd made it clear that mixing business with personal feelings was off limits. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing meant risking everything you thought you wanted? Tell us about a time when circumstances forced you to face your true feelings. 3 rows away, Khalil lay in his own sleeping area, staring at the cabin ceiling as the jet carried them toward an uncertain future. The crisis in Dubai was real and urgent, requiring all his focus and expertise. But the crisis sitting 3 feet away from him was equally real and far more dangerous to his carefully constructed emotional defenses. Working with Amara had been a revelation. Her mind was even more brilliant than he'd realized. Her intuitive grasp of complex systems matched only by her genuine passion for helping others. But it was the moment when she'd looked up from her tablet, her face flushed with excitement over a problem solved, that had nearly undone him completely. He'd wanted to kiss her. Not just wanted, needed, with an intensity that had caught him completely off guard. For a few seconds, all his carefully constructed walls had crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The turbulence had been a blessing and a curse, saving him from making a mistake that could complicate everything, while leaving him aching with unfulfilled possibility. His phone buzzed with a message from Omar. "Heard about the crisis. If you need backup, I can be in Dubai by morning." Khalil stared at the message, then typed back, "I have all the backup I need. Anyone I know." He hesitated, then deleted his response without sending it. How could he explain that his backup was a woman who'd been discarded by her husband just days ago? A woman whose brilliant mind was matched only by her wounded heart? A woman who was making him question everything he thought he knew about love and trust, and the courage to try again? Outside the cabin windows, stars scattered across the darkness like scattered diamonds, each one a distant sun with its own planets, its own possibilities. Somewhere in that vast expanse, the sun was rising over Dubai, where 40,000 people were waking up to a crisis that would test everything he and Amara had built, separately and together. As the jet carried them toward their destination, Khalil found himself wondering if some forces were simply too powerful to resist. If some connections were meant to be tested by fire. If some walls were meant to be torn down, no matter how carefully they'd been constructed. Tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't fully anticipate. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet hum of the engines and the steady breathing of the woman who was changing his world, Khalil allowed himself to imagine what might be possible if he was brave enough to let his walls fall. The jet flew on through the darkness, carrying two people toward a crisis that would force them to confront not just the technical challenge ahead, but the growing certainty that some things, some people, were worth risking everything for. The Dubai sun blazed mercilessly as Amara stood in the middle of what had once been a state-of-the-art water treatment facility, now reduced to twisted metal and shattered concrete. The acrid smell of burned electronics hung in the air, mixing with dust and the underlying scent of desperation that seemed to cling to everything in the affected area. The explosion originated here, Khalil said, pointing to a crater where the main processing unit had been. His white shirt was already damp with sweat, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms as he gestured toward the destruction. The blast was so powerful it took out the backup systems as well. Amara crouched near the debris, her engineering mind automatically cataloging the damage. They'd been on the ground for 6 hours, working with barely a break to assess the situation and coordinate the emergency response. The intensity of the crisis had temporarily pushed their personal tension into the background, but it simmered beneath every interaction. "This wasn't equipment failure," she said quietly, examining the blast pattern. "Look at the scorch marks, the way the metal twisted. This was sabotage." Khalil's expression darkened. "I was afraid of that. The question is why, and who?" A commotion near the facility's entrance drew their attention. A convoy of vehicles had arrived, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached. From the lead car emerged a woman in an elegant black abaya, her movements graceful and purposeful as she walked toward them. "Khalil," the woman called out, her voice carrying a note of familiarity that made Amara's stomach clench with unexpected jealousy. "Layla," Khalil replied, his entire body going rigid. "What are you doing here?" The woman, Layla, smiled with practiced charm as she approached. She was beautiful in the way that spoke of breeding and privilege, her dark eyes intelligent and calculating. "When I heard about the crisis, I had to come. My family's foundation is coordinating relief efforts with the government." "How convenient," Khalil said, his voice carefully neutral. But Amara caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched almost imperceptibly at his sides. Layla's gaze shifted to Amara, taking in her dust-covered clothes and practical work boots with barely concealed disdain. "And you must be the American engineer I've heard about." "How?" Interesting that Khalil would bring an outsider into such a sensitive situation. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Amara felt herself straightening, her own defenses rising. "I'm here because my technology can help people who need clean water. That's all that matters." "Of course," Layla said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I hope you understand the complexities of working in this region. Cultural sensitivities, political considerations. It can be quite overwhelming for someone unfamiliar with our ways." Khalil stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Layla, we have work to do. If your foundation wants to help, coordinate with Nadia. Otherwise what?" Layla's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder beneath. "You'll have me escorted away like a common criminal?" Again, the words hung in the air like a challenge. Amara looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand, but that clearly ran deep. This wasn't just a chance encounter. There was history here, painful and complicated. "Amara," Khalil said without taking his eyes off Layla, "would you mind checking on the equipment installation? I'll join you shortly." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Amara wanted to object, to stand her ground, but the tension between Khalil and Layla was so thick she could barely breathe. She nodded and walked away, but not before catching the satisfaction in Layla's eyes. From across the construction site, Amara watched Khalil and Layla's heated conversation, their body language speaking volumes even when she couldn't hear their words. Layla stood too close, her hand occasionally touching Khalil's arm in gestures that spoke of intimacy. Khalil remained rigid, but he didn't pull away. "They have history," said a voice behind her. Amara turned to find Nadia approaching, her expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry. Prince Khalil and Ms. Mansouri. They were engaged 3 years ago. The relationship ended badly." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. Engaged. Of course. Beautiful, sophisticated Layla was exactly the type of woman someone like Khalil would choose. Someone from his world, who understood the complexities of wealth and power. What happened? Amara found herself asking, then immediately felt guilty for prying. Nadia was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the distant figures. She betrayed him, sold confidential information about his business ventures to competitors. When he discovered it, she claimed she'd done it for love, to test whether he truly trusted her. That's twisted. It nearly destroyed him. Not just financially, though the losses were significant. Emotionally. He'd opened his heart completely for the first time, and she used that vulnerability against him. Since then, Nadia shrugged sadly. He's been very careful about who he allows close. Amara watched as Layla reached out to touch Khalil's face, a gesture of intimate familiarity that made her chest ache with emotions she had no right to feel. Why is she here now? Ms. Mansouri has a talent for appearing when Prince Khalil is vulnerable. She's tried to reconcile several times over the years, always claiming it was a mistake, that she truly loved him. But trust, once broken, can't easily be repaired, Amara finished quietly. As if sensing her observation, Khalil looked toward her across the dusty construction site. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his face, the conflict playing out in his dark eyes. Then Layla said something that drew his attention back, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture that spoke of claimed territory. Amara turned away, focusing on the water purification units being assembled by the technical team. She had no business feeling jealous. Khalil had made it clear their relationship was professional. She was there to do a job, to prove her technology worked, to help people who needed clean water. But watching him with a woman who clearly knew how to navigate his world, who belonged in ways Amara never could, brought all her insecurities rushing back. The same feelings that had plagued her marriage to Richard. The sense that she was somehow not enough, not the right fit, easily replaceable when someone better came along. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Saw the news about the water crisis. You're actually there? OMG. How's it going with the mysterious prince? Amara stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could she explain that she was falling for a man who might still be in love with his ex-fiancé? That she was repeating the same patterns that had destroyed her marriage, putting her heart in the hands of someone who might not value it? Instead, she typed back, working. We'll call later. An hour later, Khalil found Amara crouched beside one of the purification units, her hands covered in dust as she made minute adjustments to the solar panel alignment. Her focus was complete, her earlier warmth replaced by professional distance. The installation is ahead of schedule, he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Good. She didn't look up from her work. We should have clean water flowing by tomorrow morning. The coolness in her tone was unmistakable. Khalil felt something clench in his chest, regret, disappointment, or maybe just the familiar ache of another connection slipping away. Amara, about earlier. It's fine. She finally looked up, her green eyes guarded. Your personal relationships are none of my business. We're here to work. It's not what you think. I don't think anything. Like I said, it's none of my business. But there was hurt in her voice, carefully controlled but audible to someone who was learning to read her moods. Khalil crouched beside her, his voice low enough that the nearby workers couldn't overhear. Layla and I have history. Painful history. She has a way of appearing when my defenses are down. You don't owe me explanations. Maybe not, but I want you to understand. 3 years ago, I thought I'd found someone I could trust completely. Someone I could build a future with. I was wrong. Something in his tone made Amara pause in her work. She could hear the pain beneath the careful control, the echo of betrayal that resonated with her own recent wounds. What did she do? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Khalil was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon where heat waves shimmered like liquid silver. She sold my business secrets to competitors. When I confronted her, she said she'd done it to test my love, that if I truly trusted her, I would have shared everything with her freely. She turned my attempts to protect certain information into proof that I didn't love her enough. That's manipulative. Yes, but the worst part was that she was partially right. I hadn't trusted her completely. I'd held back, not out of lack of love, but out of caution. And when everything fell apart, I wondered if my failure to trust completely had driven her to betray me. Amara set down her tools, finally understanding the walls she'd sensed around him. It wasn't your fault. Trust has to be earned, not demanded. Does it? Or is love supposed to be about leaping without looking, trusting without reservations? The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond his relationship with Layla. Amara found herself thinking about her own marriage, about the ways she'd ignored warning signs because she'd believed love meant accepting everything without question. I thought love meant sacrifice, she said quietly. Giving up pieces of yourself to make someone else happy. My husband, ex-husband, he never asked me to stop painting, but I knew he didn't like it. He never said my engineering work was worthless, but he made it clear it wasn't important. Little by little, I made myself smaller to fit into his idea of who I should be. What happened? Khalil's voice was gentle, encouraging. He decided I still wasn't enough. 3 days ago, he left me for someone who fits his world better. Someone who understands the importance of appearances and social connections. Someone who won't embarrass him with messy emotions or inconvenient dreams. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Khalil studied her face, seeing past the professional mask to the wounded woman beneath. He was a fool, Khalil said simply. Was he? Or was I a fool for thinking I could be enough for someone like that? What do you think makes someone worthy of love? Changing to fit someone else's expectations, or being brave enough to be authentically yourself? Share your thoughts about self-worth in relationships below. Before Khalil could answer, Layla appeared beside them, her smile bright and predatory. I hope I'm not interrupting something important. Actually, you are, Amara said, standing up and dusting off her hands. We're trying to save lives here. Of course you are. How noble. Layla's tone dripped with condescension. Though I can't help but wonder if you truly understand what you're getting yourself into. Khalil has a pattern of discarding people when they're no longer useful to him. Layla. Khalil's voice was warning. What? I'm simply sharing my experience. 3 years together, and when things became complicated, he threw me away like I meant nothing. You betrayed me, Khalil said quietly, but there was pain in his voice along with the anger. I made a mistake. I was young, I was scared of how much I loved you, and I made a terrible decision. But I've regretted it every day since. I've tried to make amends, tried to prove that I've changed, but you refused to even listen. Amara felt like an intruder witnessing something intensely private. But she also heard something in Layla's voice that gave her pause. Genuine pain, real regret. Maybe there was more to this story than simple betrayal. I should let you two talk, she said, stepping back. No. Khalil reached out, his hand catching her wrist gently but firmly. You don't need to leave. The touch sent electricity through Amara's entire body. But it was Layla's sharp intake of breath, the flash of something dangerous in her dark eyes, that made Amara realize the full implications of Khalil's gesture. "How interesting," Layla said softly. "It seems you've found someone new to trust. I wonder how long it will take for you to destroy this one too." "Stop." Khalil's voice was sharp with authority. "Or what? You'll have me arrested? Exiled? You have such power, Khalil, but you're still the same frightened boy who's too scared to let anyone truly close." The accusation hit its mark. Amara saw Khalil flinch, saw the way Layla's words found their target with practiced precision. This was why she was dangerous, not just because of what she'd done, but because she knew exactly how to wound him. "You're right," Khalil said quietly, surprising them both. "I am frightened. You taught me that love and betrayal often come hand in hand. That opening your heart means giving someone the power to destroy you. And yet here you are," Layla gestured toward Amara, "making the same mistake again. At least I belonged in your world." She's a stranger, someone who will never understand the pressures and expectations that come with your position. How long before she disappoints you too? The words hit Amara like physical blows, because there was truth in them. She didn't belong in Khalil's world of wealth and power and international influence. She was an engineer from New York whose husband had just left her, someone struggling to rebuild her life from the ashes of her marriage. "You don't know anything about her," Khalil said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I? She's vulnerable, recently divorced, grateful for your attention and investment in her little project. She's mistaking gratitude for deeper feelings, and you're mistaking her temporary need for genuine connection. When the crisis passes and reality sets in, you'll both realize this was just two wounded people seeking comfort in each other." The assessment was surgical in its precision, cutting straight to Amara's deepest fears. Was she mistaking gratitude for attraction? Was her growing feelings for Khalil just a rebound from her failed marriage? "I think," Amara said quietly, "I should focus on the work. That's what I'm here for." She walked away before either of them could respond, leaving Khalil and Layla standing in the dust and heat, the weight of their shared history stretching between them like a chasm that might never be bridged. As Amara threw herself into the technical work, she tried to push away Layla's words, but they echoed in her mind, mixing with her own doubts and insecurities. Maybe she was just a wounded woman seeking comfort in the arms of a man who would eventually realize she wasn't worth the complications she brought to his carefully ordered world. Behind her, she could hear Khalil and Layla's voices, their conversation intense and private. And for the first time since arriving in Dubai, Amara wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake in coming here. Not just professionally, but personally. Some wounds, she was learning, never truly healed. They just waited for the right moment to tear open again, reminding you that some risks were too dangerous to take, and some people were too damaged to save. The first drops of clean water began flowing from Amara's purification system at 4:47 a.m., just as the first call to prayer echoed across the city. In the pre-dawn darkness, lit by construction lights and the glow of monitoring equipment, 40 technicians and engineers gathered around the central distribution point to witness what felt like a miracle. Amara stood beside the main unit, her tablet displaying perfect readings. Flow rate optimal, purity levels exceeding standards, solar systems charging efficiently in preparation for the day ahead. After 18 hours of nonstop work, her system was not only operational, but performing beyond her most optimistic projections. "It's working," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Khalil appeared beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion, but lit with something approaching wonder. He'd been coordinating with government officials and relief organizations throughout the night, but his eyes had rarely left her work for more than a few minutes. "More than working," he said quietly. "Amara, do you realize what you've accomplished? 40,000 people will have clean water by sunrise. In 18 hours, you've achieved what conventional systems would have taken months to restore. Around them, the technical crew was beginning to celebrate, quiet cheers and embraces, relief and pride mixing in the humid pre-dawn air. But Amara barely noticed. She was staring at the steady flow of crystal-clear water, watching months of theoretical work become life-saving reality. Mrs. Morrison called out Dr. Hassan, the local health commissioner who'd been monitoring the installation. The first water quality tests are complete. Your system is producing water that exceeds World Health Organization standards. This is extraordinary. The formal praise should have filled her with triumph. Instead, she felt oddly hollow, disconnected from the victory. The confrontation with Layla 8 hours earlier had left her emotionally drained, questioning everything about her presence here and her growing feelings for Khalil. "I should check the backup systems," she said, turning away from the gathering crowd. "Amara." Khalil's voice stopped her. "The backup systems are fine. You've checked them 6 times in the past hour. I just want to be sure. You're avoiding the celebration. And you're avoiding me." She turned to face him, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in his dark eyes. They'd barely spoken since Layla's visit, communicating only about technical necessities while the weight of unspoken tensions grew between them. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm doing my job. Your job is done. Brilliantly. Those people celebrating over there are alive because of your mind, your dedication, your refusal to accept that some problems can't be solved." His voice dropped, becoming more intimate despite the crowd around them. "You've saved lives today, Amara. Thousands of them." The sincerity in his voice threatened to break through the walls she'd been building since Layla's appearance. But the other woman's words echoed in her mind. "She's mistaking gratitude for deeper feelings, and you're mistaking her temporary need for genuine connection." "I should get some rest," she said, stepping back. "Long day tomorrow, coordinating with the relief teams." Before Khalil could respond, she walked away, leaving him standing alone beside the system that had changed everything and nothing between them. 3 hours later, Amara sat on the balcony of her hotel room, watching the sun rise over Dubai's skyline. The city was awakening below, early morning traffic beginning to flow, construction cranes reaching toward a sky painted in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the distance, she could see the facility where clean water was flowing because of her work. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt lost. Her laptop sat open beside her, cursor blinking in an empty email to Maya. How could she explain that she'd achieved her greatest professional victory while feeling like her personal life was falling apart? That she was falling for a man who might still be in love with someone else? That she was terrified of repeating the same patterns that had destroyed her marriage? A soft knock at the door interrupted her brooding. She almost ignored it, but the knock came again, gentle but persistent. "Amara, it's Khalil. I know you said you needed rest, but I brought coffee. And I think we need to talk." She closed her laptop with a sigh. The smart thing would be to send him away, to maintain the professional distance that would protect them both. But she was tired of being smart, tired of protecting herself from possibilities that might hurt her. She opened the door to find him holding 2 steaming cups and looking as exhausted as she felt. His usual immaculate appearance was rumpled, his white shirt wrinkled, his dark hair mussed, stubble shadowing his jaw. He looked human and vulnerable and heartbreakingly beautiful. "Coffee," he said simply, "and answers if you want them." She stepped aside to let him in, accepting the cup with hands that trembled slightly. They stood in her small sitting area, the weight of everything unsaid stretching between them like a bridge neither was sure was safe to cross. "You've been avoiding me since Layla left," Khalil said finally. "I told you, I was working. Amara." His voice was gentle but firm. "Please. We've been through too much together for you to lie to me now." The simple request for honesty undid her carefully constructed defenses. She set down her coffee cup and walked to the window, her back to him as she struggled to find words for feelings she'd been trying to suppress. "She was right," Amara said quietly. "About me not belonging in your world. About me mistaking gratitude for other things. About the fact that I'm vulnerable and rebounding from a failed marriage. And you believe her? Don't you?" She turned to face him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Look at us, Khalil. You're a prince, a billionaire, someone who operates on a global stage. I'm an engineer whose husband just left her, who's so desperate to prove her worth that she flew halfway around the world to work with a stranger. Is that what you think this is? Desperation. I don't know what this is." The words burst out of her, carrying weeks of confusion and fear. "I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just my wounded heart seeking comfort. I don't know if you see me as a partner or a project. I don't know anything except that I can't afford to be wrong again." Khalil set down his own cup and crossed the room to stand before her. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion she'd never heard before. "3 days ago, you walked into my office carrying a prototype and a dream. You were broken, yes, but not defeated. Wounded, but not weak. When you explained your technology, your whole face lit up with passion and purpose. Do you know what I saw in that moment?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I saw someone who had the courage to pursue her vision even when the person who should have supported her most had walked away. Someone who believed in solutions instead of accepting problems. Someone who cared more about saving lives than protecting herself from potential hurt." His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize were falling. "Amara, what happened yesterday? Your system working, 40,000 people having clean water. That wasn't gratitude or desperation. That was brilliance. That was dedication. That was you changing the world because you refused to accept that things had to stay broken." But Layla said, "Layla is my past. A past I've been carrying like a weight around my heart for 3 years. But you," his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "you make me want to believe in the future again." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, and terrifying in its vulnerability. Amara searched his face, seeing past the carefully controlled exterior to the man beneath. Someone who'd been as wounded by love as she had, who'd built walls as high as her own, who was taking the same leap of faith he was asking her to take. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I, terrified, actually. But I'm more scared of walking away from this, from you, and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Have you ever reached a moment where you had to choose between protecting yourself and risking everything for love? Tell us about the courage it takes to be vulnerable when your heart has been broken before." For a long moment, they stood frozen in possibility, balanced on the knife's edge between safety and surrender. Then Amara made her choice. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Khalil's arms came around her, when he kissed her back with 3 years of carefully guarded emotion, it became something else entirely. A promise, a healing, a recognition that some connections are worth the risk of being broken again. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other as they tried to process what had just shifted between them. "This changes everything," Khalil said quietly. "I know. There will be complications. The media, the cultural differences, the business partnership. I know. My world isn't easy. There are expectations, protocols, people who will question your motives and mine. I know." Amara pulled back to meet his eyes. "But Khalil, I'm not Layla. I'm not going to betray you or use your feelings against you. And I'm not going to disappear into your world and lose myself like I did with Richard. If we do this, we do it as equals. 2 people choosing each other, not one person trying to fit into someone else's life." The strength in her voice, the clear-eyed assessment of what lay ahead, sent something warm and hopeful through his chest. This wasn't a wounded woman seeking rescue. This was a brilliant, strong woman offering partnership. Equals, he agreed, then smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. Though I should warn you, as my equal, you'll be expected to endure my family's scrutiny, international media attention, and enough formal dinners to last several lifetimes. And you'll be expected to endure my terrible cooking, my tendency to get lost in engineering problems for hours at a time, and my complete ignorance of royal protocol. I think I can manage that. They kissed again, deeper this time, without the tentative quality of the first. This was a mutual recognition that they were stepping across a line from which there would be no easy return. When Khalil's phone buzzed with an urgent message, they broke apart reluctantly. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to business mode. The water distribution is ahead of schedule. They want us both at the facility for a press conference in 2 hours. A press conference? Amara felt a flutter of nervousness. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention. You'll be brilliant, Khalil said confidently. But Amara, once we appear together publicly, there will be speculation. About the technology, about our partnership, about us. She took a deep breath, thinking about the magnitude of what they were embarking on. Not just the romantic relationship, but the professional partnership that could change how the world approached water scarcity. The technology that could save millions of lives. The media attention that would scrutinize every aspect of their connection. Together? She asked, echoing his words from the night they'd first met. Together, he confirmed, taking her hand in his. As they prepared to face the world as partners, professional and personal, both knew they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no easy return. But for the first time in years, the risk felt worth taking. Outside the window, Dubai gleamed in the morning sun, and somewhere in the distance, clean water flowed from systems built by a woman who'd refused to accept that some problems couldn't be solved, and funded by a man who'd forgotten how to trust until she reminded him that some people were worth the risk. The press conference would bring new challenges, new complications, new tests of what they were building together. But in this moment, in the quiet sanctuary of her hotel room, with the taste of possibility on their lips and the future stretching ahead like an unwritten story, they allowed themselves to believe that sometimes the most broken people find exactly what they need in each other. The press conference was supposed to be a triumph. Under the blazing Dubai sun, with the gleaming water purification systems humming efficiently in the background, Khalil and Amara stood before an assembly of international journalists, government officials, and humanitarian organization representatives. The first 20 minutes had gone perfectly, glowing reports about the technology's success, praise for the rapid deployment, questions about future applications that Amara answered with growing confidence. Then everything changed. Prince Khalil called out a reporter from the back of the crowd, her voice cutting through the celebratory atmosphere like a blade. Victoria Chun from Global Financial News. Can you comment on reports that your partnership with Mrs. Morrison extends beyond the professional? And how does this relate to the timing of her very convenient divorce? The question hit the gathering like a shockwave. Amara felt the blood drain from her face as every camera in the crowd suddenly swiveled toward her. Beside her, Khalil's expression went carefully blank, his media training kicking in. I'm not sure what you're implying, Khalil said evenly. I'm implying that the timing seems rather suspicious, Victoria continued, clearly relishing the moment. Mrs. Morrison's divorce was finalized yesterday morning, less than a week after her husband filed. Unusually fast, wouldn't you say? Almost as if the proceedings were expedited by someone with significant influence. Amara's heart stopped. Her divorce hadn't been finalized. Richard's lawyers had said it would take months. But even as she opened her mouth to deny it, Victoria was pulling out a tablet, her voice carrying across the crowd. And then there's this interesting financial development. Court documents filed this morning show that as part of the divorce settlement, Richard Morrison is claiming half ownership of Mrs. Morrison's water purification technology. He's seeking an injunction to prevent any international partnerships until the intellectual property dispute is resolved. The words hit Amara like physical blows. Richard was trying to claim her technology, the work she'd developed before they were even married, using her own resources and research? That's impossible, she said, her voice barely audible above the sudden buzz of conversation among the reporters. Is it? Victoria smiled with predatory satisfaction. Mr. Morrison's legal team argues that as her husband, he provided financial support that enabled her research. They're claiming community property rights to all developments during the marriage. Khalil stepped closer to Amara, his presence protective, but his face a mask of controlled fury. This press conference is about water technology and humanitarian aid. Personal legal matters. But they're not separate anymore, are they? Victoria interrupted. Not when Mrs. Morrison's personal relationship with you directly impacts a $50 million international partnership. Especially when that relationship may have been developing while she was still married. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Amara could see the speculation in every face, the rapid calculations being made by journalists who smelled scandal. Her revolutionary technology was becoming a footnote to rumors about adultery and financial manipulation. The timeline of my personal life has nothing to do with the merit of this technology, Amara said, finding her voice. The system you see working behind us was developed by a woman who may not legally own it, Victoria shot back, and funded by a man who appears to have very personal reasons for wanting to help her fight her ex-husband's claims. Before anyone could respond, another voice cut through the crowd. Perhaps I can provide some clarity. Richard Morrison stepped into view, flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers, and wearing the confident smile that had once made Amara's heart race. Now it made her stomach clench with dread. He looked every inch the successful businessman. Perfectly tailored suit, confident bearing, the kind of polished presence that commanded rooms and boardrooms alike. Beside him, Amara suddenly felt small and exposed. The brilliant engineer transformed back into the inadequate wife who'd never quite measured up. Richard, she breathed, the name barely escaping her lips. Hello, darling, he said with false warmth. Quite a show you've put on here. Though I have to say, I'm disappointed you didn't acknowledge my contributions to your little project. Your contributions? Amara's voice rose with disbelief. You called it a hobby. You said it was a waste of time. I said it needed refinement, which it clearly did, given that you required Prince Khalil's resources to make it viable. Richard's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. The fact remains that this technology was developed during our marriage, using resources I provided. Under New York law, I have legitimate claims to intellectual property developed during our union. Khalil stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Morrison, I suggest you and your legal team handle your domestic disputes through proper channels, not international press conferences. Oh, but this is very much an international matter now, isn't it? Richard's gaze shifted between Khalil and Amara with calculated malice. Especially given the speed with which my wife moved from our marriage bed to new arrangements. The crude implication made several reporters gasp audibly. Amara felt heat flood her face, not embarrassment but rage. How dare you, she whispered, then louder. How dare you stand there and imply? You left me, Richard. You walked out on me an hour. She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd almost revealed her pregnancy to a crowd of international media. But Richard caught the slip, his eyes sharpening with interest. Are what, Amara? What else have you been keeping from your new partner? The world seemed to tilt around her. The pregnancy she'd been protecting, the secret she'd planned to handle privately, was about to become international headlines alongside everything else being destroyed. "This ends now," Khalil said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Security, please escort Mr. Morrison and his team from the premises. This is private property." "Actually," said one of Richard's lawyers, stepping forward with a legal document, "we have an injunction preventing any further deployment or operation of the disputed technology until the ownership questions are resolved. This facility must be shut down immediately." The crowd erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed frantically, and security moved to control the situation. But Amara heard none of it. She was staring at the legal document that could destroy everything. The water system that was saving lives, the partnership that had given her hope, the future she dared to imagine. "This can't be legal," she said to Khalil, her voice lost in the din. "We'll fight it," he replied, but she could see the concern in his dark eyes. "My legal team will be tied up in international courts for months while 40,000 people lose access to clean water," Richard said with satisfaction. "Unless, of course, Amara comes to her senses and negotiates reasonably." "What do you want?" Amara asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. 50% ownership of the technology and all future profits. Recognition as co-developer. And, his smile turned predatory, full custody of any children from our marriage. The last condition hit like a sledgehammer. Amara's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, and Richard's eyes followed the gesture with triumph. "You're pregnant," he said loudly enough for the reporters to hear. "My child. How interesting that you forgot to mention that to your new partner." The crowd exploded again. Every camera swung toward Amara, capturing her shock and pain in high definition. She looked at Khalil and saw him processing the information, not just that she was pregnant, but that she'd kept it from him. The betrayal in his eyes was devastating. "Khalil, I can explain," she began. "Can you?" His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the hurt beneath. "Another secret, Amara? Another piece of crucial information you decided I didn't need to know. It wasn't like that. I was going to tell you." "When? After we'd signed more contracts? After I'd invested more in your technology? After I'd fallen completely in love with a woman who apparently doesn't trust me with the truth?" The words "fallen completely in love" should have filled her with joy. Instead, spoken in pain and anger, they felt like daggers to her heart. Richard watched the exchange with evident satisfaction. "It seems your new partner doesn't appreciate being kept in the dark any more than I did. Perhaps it's time you learned that successful relationships require honesty, darling." "Don't," Amara said, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare lecture me about honesty when you're destroying people's access to clean water for your own petty revenge. I'm protecting my rights and my child's future. This technology could be worth hundreds of millions. Did you really think I'd walk away from that?" The brutal calculation in his voice, reducing their unborn child to a financial asset, made Amara physically ill. This was the man she'd loved, the man she'd trusted with her heart and her dreams. Now he was using their child as leverage in a scheme to steal her life's work. "The injunction is temporary," said Richard's lead lawyer, addressing the crowd. "But it will remain in effect until Mrs. Morrison agrees to negotiate in good faith regarding the ownership dispute." "And if she doesn't?" asked one of the reporters. "Then this facility shuts down, the people lose their water source, and Mrs. Morrison's reputation for putting personal gain above humanitarian concerns becomes very public indeed." It was masterfully done, making her look like the villain for refusing to give Richard half of everything she'd built. The man who'd abandoned her was positioning himself as the reasonable party seeking fair compensation. Amara looked around the crowd of reporters, government officials, and humanitarian workers, seeing the doubt creeping into their expressions. The triumph of the morning had been poisoned, transformed into a scandal that would follow her for the rest of her career. But it was Khalil's expression that broke her completely. The warmth that had been growing between them was gone, replaced by the careful mask she'd seen when they first met. The walls were going back up, and she could see him retreating into the protected space where he'd lived before she'd convinced him to trust again. Do you think some betrayals are unforgivable, even when they come from a place of fear rather than malice? Tell us about a time when keeping a secret hurt someone you cared about. I need to speak with my legal team, Khalil said formally, his voice professional and distant. Mrs. Morrison, perhaps you should do the same. The use of her formal name felt like a slap. Hours ago, he'd been whispering her first name against her lips. Now he couldn't even look at her. Khalil, please. I think we've all heard enough for one day, he said, turning away from her. This press conference is over. As security moved to disperse the crowd, Richard approached Amara one final time. You always were too naive for this world, darling. Did you really think you could steal technology developed during our marriage and run off with some foreign prince without consequences? I didn't steal anything. This is my work. Prove it in court. But remember, every day you fight me is another day those people go without water. Their suffering is on your hands now. He walked away with his lawyers, leaving Amara standing alone in the dispersing crowd. The water purification systems continued their steady work behind her, producing clean water that might be shut off because of her ex-husband's greed and her own failures of trust. Khalil was already gone, disappeared into a convoy of black vehicles with his security team. She destroyed everything between them with her silence, proving Layla's words about her worthiness more brutally than even that manipulative woman could have imagined. As the last of the reporters packed up their equipment, Amara stood in the blazing Dubai sun, more alone than she'd ever been in her life. Her marriage was over, her technology was under legal attack, her pregnancy was international news, and the man she'd fallen in love with had just learned she was capable of the same betrayals that had nearly destroyed him before. The water systems hummed behind her, a monument to what was possible when broken people found each other and dared to build something beautiful together. But monuments, she was learning, could be torn down as easily as they were built. And sometimes the people who destroyed them were the ones you trusted most. The penthouse suite felt like a tomb. Khalil stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dubai Marina, his reflection a ghost against the glittering city lights. 24 hours had passed since the press conference that had torn his world apart, and he hadn't moved from this spot for the last 3 hours. His phone buzzed incessantly on the marble table behind him, calls from lawyers, government ministers, board members, and journalists. All of them wanting answers he didn't have, solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. But it was the calls he wasn't taking that haunted him most. Amara had tried to reach him 17 times. Each unanswered call felt like a small betrayal, but he couldn't bring himself to hear her voice. Not yet. Not when every instinct screamed that he'd been played again, that his careful walls had been torn down by someone who'd hidden fundamental truths from him. Pregnant. She was carrying another man's child and hadn't trusted him enough to share that crucial detail. The revelation had cut deeper than Richard Morrison's legal maneuvering, deeper than the media circus, deeper than the threat to their business partnership. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called without turning. "Your Highness." Nadia's voice was carefully neutral. "Your legal team is here for the emergency meeting." "Cancel it." "Sir, the injunction." "I said cancel it." His voice carried an edge that made even seasoned diplomats back down. "I need more time to think." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "And Mrs. Morrison?" "She's called again. She sounds desperate." Khalil closed his eyes, fighting the urge to take the call. "What would you do, Nadia? If someone you'd begun to trust, someone you'd opened your heart to, kept something that fundamental from you?" I'd ask myself why they felt they couldn't tell me. The simple response hit him like a physical blow. Because when he looked past his hurt and anger, when he tried to see the situation through Amara's eyes, uncomfortable truths began to emerge. She'd been abandoned by her husband while pregnant. Traumatized, alone, probably terrified of how the pregnancy would be perceived in a new relationship. Had his own walls. His insistence on keeping things professional made her feel she couldn't share something so personal. The water facility, he said quietly. How many people does the shutdown affect? 43,000 as of this morning. The government has brought in emergency water trucks, but it's not sustainable long term. 43,000 people suffering because of his wounded pride and Richard Morrison's calculated cruelty. Khalil thought of the little girl in the photograph on his office wall. Layla, who'd never tasted clean water until his systems gave her hope. How many Laylas were going without because he couldn't separate his personal pain from humanitarian necessity? Sir, Nadia continued carefully, there's something else you should know. Mrs. Morrison isn't just calling you. She's been working. That got his attention. He turned from the window. Working. She's been in the legal library at the American University for 18 hours straight, researching international intellectual property law. She's also contacted 3 patent attorneys and has been pulling together documentation to prove the technology was developed before her marriage. How do you know this? Because I've been having her watched. For her protection, Nadia added quickly. The media attention has been intense. But sir, she looks terrible. She hasn't eaten, barely slept, and she's pushing herself past exhaustion. Khalil felt something twist in his chest. Even in crisis, even facing the destruction of everything she'd worked for, Amara was fighting. Not for herself, but for the people who needed clean water. There's more, Nadia continued. I may have overstepped, but I took the liberty of having our own legal team research her claims. The technology was indeed developed before her marriage, using her own resources and research from her graduate work. Mr. Morrison's claims appear to be legally questionable at best. Then why haven't we challenged the injunction? Because you haven't answered your phone for 24 hours, and Mrs. Morrison's own legal counsel is. Nadia paused diplomatically. Less experienced with international law. Khalil ran a hand through his hair, finally understanding the full scope of what his silence had cost. While he'd been nursing his wounds, Amara had been fighting alone against forces that could destroy her, just like she'd been fighting alone when he first met her. Get me everything, he said quietly. Every document, every legal precedent, every option we have to challenge this injunction. And Nadia. Yes, sir? Find out where she is right now. The law library at American University, Dubai was nearly empty at 2 a.m., its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across rows of legal texts and case studies. Amara sat surrounded by stacks of books and printouts, her laptop screen displaying a complex timeline of her technology's development. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, her back ached from hunching over books for hours, and the pregnancy nausea that had been mercifully absent for weeks had returned with a vengeance. But she couldn't stop. Every hour the injunction remained in place was another hour that people went without clean water because of her failures. Her phone lay silent beside her laptop. Khalil hadn't returned any of her calls, and she'd finally stopped trying 6 hours ago. The rejection hurt more than Richard's betrayal, more than seeing her life's work threatened, more than facing an uncertain future as a single mother. Because for a brief, shining moment, she'd believed she'd found someone who saw her worth. Someone who valued her mind, her passion, her dreams. Someone who could love all the complicated, messy pieces of who she was. The memory of their kiss felt like something from another lifetime. Had it really been less than 48 hours since she'd stood in his arms, believing that broken people could find healing in each other? Working late, Amara's head snapped up to find Khalil standing in the library entrance, his appearance as disheveled as she'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was mussed, his shirt wrinkled, and exhaustion lined his face. But it was the expression in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger, not distance, but something that looked almost like apology. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Nadia told me where to find you." He moved closer, his gaze taking in the fortress of legal texts she'd built around herself. "She also told me you've been here for 18 hours without food or rest. I have to fix this." Amara gestured helplessly at the papers surrounding her. "I have to prove that the technology is mine, that Richard has no legal claim. People are suffering because of my mistakes." "Amara." "No, let me finish." She stood on unsteady legs, facing him across the cluttered table. "You were right to walk away. You were right not to trust me. I kept the pregnancy secret because I was scared. Scared you'd think I was trying to trap you, scared you'd see me as damaged goods, scared of being rejected again. But that's not an excuse. You opened your heart to me, and I repaid that trust with lies." Khalil was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent light. She looked fragile and fierce at the same time. A woman who'd been pushed to her breaking point, but refused to surrender. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have trusted you. Should have given you the chance to explain instead of retreating into old wounds and familiar walls. No, you shouldn't have. Khalil, I know what betrayal does to someone. I know what it costs to trust again. I had no right to put you in that position. Perhaps. But I had no right to abandon you to fight this alone." He moved around the table, stepping into her carefully constructed fortress of legal research. "Amara, in the past 24 hours, I've learned something important about myself." She looked up at him, afraid to hope. "I learned that being angry with you hurt less than being without you. That protecting my pride mattered less than protecting what we'd built together. That some risks are worth taking, even when you've been burned before." Tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. "Khalil, I'm pregnant with another man's child. I'm in the middle of a legal nightmare that could destroy your reputation. I'm exactly the kind of complication you've spent years avoiding." "Yes," he agreed, then smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the press conference. "You're also brilliant, passionate, and stubborn enough to sit in a law library for 18 hours to save people you've never met. You're the woman who convinced me to trust again, who showed me that some connections are worth fighting for. But the baby? We'll be lucky to have a mother who changes the world before breakfast and refuses to give up when things get difficult." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Amara, I don't care whose DNA contributed to that child's creation. If you'll have me, if you'll trust me despite my failures of the past day, I'd be honored to help you raise a little world changer." The words broke something open in her chest, releasing hope she'd been afraid to feel. "You mean that?" "I mean that I love you. Not the uncomplicated version of you that would be easier to handle, but the real you, pregnant, legally embattled, brilliant, stubborn, beautiful you. The you who builds water systems while other people build walls. The you who fights for strangers and forgives fools like me when we don't deserve it. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and fighting for love? Tell us about a moment when you decided someone was worth the risk of getting hurt again." Before she could respond, he was kissing her, soft and desperate and full of 24 hours of missed opportunities. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, holding each other as if the connection might disappear if they let go. "We still have problems," Amara said against his lips. "The injunction, Richard's claims, the media circus. Then we solve them. Together. But first, you're going to eat something and get some sleep. You look like you're about to collapse." "I can't sleep. Every hour we delay. is an hour my legal team uses to dismantle your ex-husband's claims. Amara, I have resources you haven't even imagined. International law specialists, investigators, political connections. But I can't use any of them effectively if you work yourself into exhaustion. She looked around at the legal fortress she'd built, realizing for the first time how futile her solo efforts had been. Not because she wasn't brilliant, but because some battles required armies, not lone soldiers. You really think we can win this? I think we can do anything, as long as we do it together. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise me complete honesty. Amara's heart clenched, wondering what other secrets he thought she might be hiding. Anything. Are you ready for what comes next? Really ready? Because once we challenge this injunction, once we go public with our relationship, there will be no hiding. Your pregnancy, our partnership, every aspect of your life will be scrutinized by international media. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? She thought about the question seriously, weighing her words before speaking. A week ago, I would have said no. A week ago, I was hiding in an empty penthouse, letting someone else define my worth. But you know what I learned today, sitting in this library? What? I learned that I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting other people's opinions and expectations control my choices. Tired of making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. She met his eyes steadily. I'm ready to fight, Khalil. For the technology, for the people who need it, and for us. But most importantly, I'm ready to fight for myself. The strength in her voice, the clear-eyed determination, sent something warm and proud through his chest. This wasn't the broken woman who'd stumbled into his office days ago. This was a warrior who'd found her weapon and learned how to wield it. Then let's go change the world, he said, taking her hand. But first, dinner. You're eating for two now, and I refuse to let my future family starve while we're saving everyone else. As they walked out of the library together, leaving behind the scattered legal texts and the fortress of solitary struggle, both knew they were crossing another threshold. Not just in their relationship, but in their understanding of what they were capable of when they stopped fighting alone. Tomorrow would bring new battles, legal, personal, and public. Richard Morrison wouldn't give up easily, and the media circus was just beginning. But tonight, in the quiet space between crisis and resolution, they allowed themselves to believe that some connections were strong enough to survive any storm. And that sometimes the most broken people really could heal each other if they were brave enough to try. 6 weeks later, the courtroom in Manhattan buzzed with tension as lawyers shuffled papers and reporters filled every available seat. The case of Morrison versus Morrison had become international news, not just for the technology at stake, but for the love story that had emerged from the legal battlefield. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hand resting protectively over the small bump that was finally becoming visible beneath her navy dress. Beside her, Khalil's presence was a steady anchor, his fingers intertwined with hers beneath the table. Across the aisle, Richard sat with his team of expensive lawyers, his confidence evident in every line of his perfectly tailored suit. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Chun, the bailiff announced. As the courtroom rose, Amara felt Khalil squeeze her hand gently. They'd spent 6 weeks building an airtight case, 6 weeks watching their relationship grow stronger under pressure, 6 weeks preparing for this moment that would determine not just the fate of her technology, but the future they were building together. Judge Chun, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. I've reviewed the preliminary filings in this case, and I want to make something clear from the outset. This court is here to determine intellectual property rights, not to adjudicate marital disputes or provide entertainment for the media. Is that understood? Both legal teams nodded soberly. Good. Mr. Harrison, you may present your opening argument for the plaintiff. Richard's lead attorney stood, smoothing his tie with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. During their 3-year marriage, Mrs. Morrison developed water purification technology using resources provided by my client. Under New York's equitable distribution laws, Mr. Morrison is entitled to 50% ownership of all marital assets, including intellectual property developed during the union. He gestured toward a display showing financial records. My client provided Mrs. Morrison with housing, living expenses, and indirect funding that enabled her to pursue her research. Without his support, this technology would never have existed. Amara felt her jaw clench at the distortion of facts, but their attorney had prepared her for this. Richard was trying to reframe his dismissive tolerance of her work as active support. Furthermore, Harrison continued, Mrs. Morrison's hasty departure from the marriage and immediate partnership with Prince Al-Rashid raises questions about the timing of these developments. The court should consider whether this technology was deliberately concealed as marital property. Objection, called out Amara's attorney, Sarah Kim, rising smoothly to her feet. Counsel is making arguments not supported by evidence. Sustained. Stick to facts, Mr. Harrison. Of course, Your Honor. The facts are simple. This technology was developed during the marriage using marital resources. Mr. Morrison seeks only what the law entitles him to. As Harrison sat down, Sarah Kim rose with quiet confidence. At 42, she was one of the most respected intellectual property attorneys in New York, and Khalil had spared no expense in securing her services. Your Honor, the defense will show that Mrs. Morrison's water purification technology was conceived, developed, and prototyped entirely before her marriage to Mr. Morrison. The core innovations stem from her graduate thesis work, completed 2 years before she even met my client's ex-husband. Sarah gestured to her own display, showing a timeline of Amara's academic and professional work. We will demonstrate that not only did Mr. Morrison provide no financial or intellectual support for this technology, he actively discouraged my client's work, calling it a hobby and pressuring her to abandon her research in favor of social obligations. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more passionate. The evidence will show that Mr. Morrison is now attempting to claim ownership of work he once dismissed, solely because that work has proven valuable. This is not equitable distribution. This is opportunistic theft. Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully. The court will hear evidence on the timeline of development, the sources of funding, and the degree of support provided by each party. Mr. Harrison, call your first witness. The defense calls Richard Morrison. Amara watched her ex-husband take the stand with the same confident swagger that had once impressed her. Now it just made her stomach turn. Under oath, he painted a picture of himself as a supportive husband who'd provided the stability and resources that enabled Amara's work. I encouraged her interests, Richard said smoothly. I provided her with a home office, covered all our living expenses, so she could focus on her research. Without my support, she never could have developed this technology. And what was your understanding of the intellectual property rights? Harrison asked. That as her husband, I was her partner in all things. We shared everything, resources, dreams, the fruits of our labor. I never imagined she would try to claim sole ownership of something we built together. The performance was masterful, painting Amara as an ungrateful wife who'd stolen marital property. But Sarah Kim was ready for cross-examination. Mr. Morrison, you testified that you encouraged your wife's work. Can you tell the court what specific encouragement you provided? Richard's confident smile flickered slightly. I supported her in countless ways. Emotional support, financial stability. I see. And can you explain this email you sent to your wife on March 15th of last year? Sarah pulled out a document. Amara, your little water project is taking up too much time. We have the Ash for dinner next week, and I need you focused on things that actually matter." That was taken out of context. Or this text message from June 3rd. "Can you please put away your science experiment? We have guests coming, and I don't want the house looking like a laboratory." Richard's composure began to crack. "I was simply trying to help her prioritize. Help her prioritize away from the work that has now made international headlines and saved thousands of lives." "Objection," Harrison called out. "Sustained. Stick to the facts, Ms. Kim." "Of course, Your Honor." "Mr. Morrison, can you explain your level of technical knowledge about water purification systems?" "I'm not an engineer, but..." "So you provided no technical input into the development of this technology?" "Not technical input per se, but..." "And you provided no financial investment specifically for research and development?" "I provided overall financial support for our household." "Mr. Morrison, did you or did you not tell your wife that her water purification work was a waste of time that no one would ever take seriously?" Richard's face flushed. "I may have expressed concerns about the commercial viability." "Thank you. No further questions." As Richard left the stand, his carefully constructed narrative in ruins, Amara felt a surge of vindication. The man who'd dismissed her dreams was being forced to confront the reality of what she'd accomplished. The next 2 days brought a parade of witnesses. Amara's graduate advisor testified about her early research. Patent attorneys confirmed the timeline of her innovations. Financial experts demonstrated that the technology's development had required no marital funds. But it was Khalil's testimony that truly turned the tide. "Prince Al-Rashid," Sarah Kim began, "can you explain your initial assessment of Mrs. Morrison's technology?" Khalil sat straight in the witness chair, his voice clear and confident. "I evaluated the technology purely on its merits. The innovations were sophisticated, well-researched, and demonstrated a deep understanding of both engineering principles and humanitarian applications. It was immediately clear that this was the work of a brilliant engineer, not someone dependent on others for technical development." "And what was your impression of Mrs. Morrison's knowledge of her own technology?" "Complete mastery. She could explain every component, every process, every application. She knew the technology inside and out because she had created it herself." "Did she ever indicate that anyone else had contributed to the technical development?" "Quite the opposite. She spoke about the isolation she'd felt, working alone on a project that others had dismissed. She was proud of what she'd accomplished independently." Harrison stood for cross-examination, clearly hoping to undermine Khalil's credibility. "Prince Al-Rashid, isn't it true that you have personal feelings for Mrs. Morrison that might color your testimony?" Khalil met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I have deep feelings for Mrs. Morrison. But those feelings developed precisely because of her brilliance, her integrity, and her commitment to helping others. My professional assessment of her technology preceded any personal relationship. But you stand to benefit financially from this partnership. Mr. Harrison," Khalil's voice carried quiet authority, "I have invested $50 million in this technology because it can save lives, not because I expect financial returns. I could lose every penny and still consider it worthwhile if it brings clean water to people who need it. But surely your romantic relationship creates a conflict of interest." "The only conflict of interest in this courtroom," Khalil said firmly, "is Mr. Morrison's attempt to claim ownership of work he actively discouraged for no reason other than spite and greed." "Objection. Sustained. The witness will limit himself to factual responses." But the damage was done. Khalil's passionate defense of both Amara and her work had resonated throughout the courtroom. "What do you think makes someone truly supportive of their partner's dreams? Encouraging them even when the path is uncertain, or trying to redirect them towards safer choices? Share your thoughts about what real partnership looks like." On the final day of testimony, Amara took the stand herself. She'd been dreading this moment, knowing that Richard's lawyer would try to paint her as deceitful and opportunistic. But as she sat in the witness chair, looking out at the packed courtroom, she felt only calm determination. Sarah Kim walked her through the timeline of her technology's development, the years of research and testing, the breakthrough moments that had come from her own insights and persistence. Amara spoke with passion about her vision of bringing clean water to underserved communities, her voice growing stronger with each question. Then came Harrison's cross-examination. "Mrs. Morrison, isn't it true that you concealed this technology from your husband during your marriage?" "I didn't conceal it. I worked on it in my home office, where Mr. Morrison could see it any time he chose to show interest. But you never discussed the commercial potential. Because he made it clear he wasn't interested. He called it a hobby, a waste of time. I learned not to bother him with details about work he'd already dismissed. And yet the moment your marriage ended, you immediately sought to profit from this hobby." Amara felt a flash of anger, but Sarah's preparation held her steady. "I sought to use this technology to save lives. The partnership with Prince Al-Rashid happened because 40,000 people needed clean water, not because I was looking for profit. But you must admit, the timing was convenient. The timing was tragic. People were suffering without clean water. If Mr. Morrison had shown any interest in humanitarian applications during our marriage, perhaps we could have helped those people sooner." Harrison pressed on, trying to rattle her, but Amara remained composed. She spoke about her dreams, her dedication, her determination to make a difference in the world. By the time she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. After closing arguments, Judge Chun retired to consider her decision. The wait was agonizing. 3 hours during which Amara and Khalil sat in the courthouse cafe, holding hands and trying not to imagine the worst-case scenarios. When they were finally called back, the courtroom was electric with tension. Judge Chun looked out over the packed gallery, her expression unreadable. "This court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding the development, funding, and ownership of the water purification technology in question. The evidence is clear and overwhelming." Amara held her breath. Mrs. Morrison conceived, developed, and perfected this technology using her own knowledge, research, and minimal personal resources. The timeline clearly shows that the core innovations preceded her marriage to Mr. Morrison. Furthermore, the evidence demonstrates that not only did Mr. Morrison provide no support for this work, he actively discouraged it. Relief began to flood through Amara, but Judge Chun wasn't finished. Mr. Morrison's claims appear to be motivated not by legitimate property rights, but by a desire to profit from work he previously dismissed. This court will not reward such opportunistic behavior. She looked directly at Richard, her voice sharp with disapproval. The motion for injunctive relief is denied. Mrs. Morrison retains full ownership of her intellectual property. Mr. Morrison's claims are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. Furthermore, this court awards Mrs. Morrison attorney's fees and court costs to be paid by the plaintiff. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Amara felt tears streaming down her face as Khalil pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "You won. You did it." But the victory felt like more than just a legal triumph. It felt like vindication of everything she'd fought for. Her right to her own dreams, her right to be valued for her mind and her contributions, her right to choose her own future. As they left the courthouse, pushing through crowds of reporters and well-wishers, Amara felt truly free for the first time in years. Free from Richard's dismissive control, free from doubt about her own worth, free to build the life she'd always dreamed of. 3 months later, the wedding ceremony took place at sunset on a private beach in the Maldives, where the azure waters met white sand, and the only sounds were gentle waves and birds calling from the palm trees. It was small and intimate, just family and close friends, exactly as Amara and Khalil had wanted. Amara walked down the sandy aisle in a flowing white dress that accommodated her growing belly, her face radiant with joy. At 7 months pregnant, she glowed with health and happiness, her hand resting protectively over their child, a child Khalil already loved as his own. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she reached him, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "So are you," she whispered back, reaching up to touch his face. The ceremony was a blend of traditions, American and Emirati customs woven together to create something uniquely theirs. When they exchanged vows, their words were personal and heartfelt, promising not just love but partnership, not just support but respect for each other's dreams. "I promise to encourage your wildest ambitions," Khalil said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "To support your work even when I don't understand it, to celebrate your successes as if they were my own, and to love not just who you are, but who you're still becoming." "I promise to trust you with my heart and my fears," Amara replied, her voice strong despite her tears. "To share my dreams and my doubts, to build something beautiful with you, and to love you not despite our complications, but because of them, because they made us who we are." When they kissed as husband and wife, the small crowd cheered, but Amara and Khalil barely heard them. They were lost in each other, in the moment, in the promise of everything that lay ahead. Maya stood as maid of honor, crying happy tears and taking pictures with her phone. Omar served as Khalil's best man, grinning widely at his cousin's obvious happiness. Even Nadia was there, elegant in a pale blue dress, her usual professional composure softened by genuine emotion. During the reception, as their guests danced on the sand and Amara sat with her feet in the warm water, Khalil came to sit beside her. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Only one," she said, then smiled at his concerned expression. "I regret that it took so much heartbreak to find you. But then again, maybe we needed to be broken before we could learn how to heal each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their friends celebrate under the star-filled sky. In 6 months, they'd launched 3 more water purification facilities across the Middle East and Africa. The technology that had nearly been stolen was now saving tens of thousands of lives, with more projects planned for the coming year. Richard had disappeared from public view after the court case, his reputation in ruins and his finances strained by legal fees. Victoria Ashford had quietly ended their engagement, apparently deciding that scandal wasn't worth the social elevation. Amara felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that they were no longer part of her story. "I have something for you," Khalil said, pulling out a small wrapped box. "We already exchanged rings," Amara laughed. "This is different. A wedding gift, but also something more." She unwrapped the box to find a delicate gold pendant, a water drop containing what looked like a tiny photograph. "It's Layla," Khalil explained, "the little girl from my office. She graduated from university last month with degrees in engineering and environmental science. She wants to work on water sustainability projects when she finishes her master's degree." Amara stared at the pendant, understanding the deeper meaning. This was their legacy, not just the technology they'd created, but the lives they'd changed, the futures they'd made possible. "She sent a message for you," Khalil continued. "She said to tell the brilliant engineer who builds water systems that some gifts change everything, and that she hopes her own work someday changes as many lives as yours has." Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks. "Will you help me put it on?" As Khalil fastened the pendant around her neck, Amara felt the weight of it, not heavy, but significant. A reminder of why they did this work, why they'd fought so hard to protect it, why their love story was about so much more than just 2 people finding each other. Have you ever experienced a moment where you realized that your struggles led you exactly where you needed to be? Tell us about a time when your greatest challenges became your greatest blessings. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms. "I love you too." "Both of you," he said, his hand joining hers on her rounded belly. As if responding to his voice, the baby kicked strongly, making them both laugh. Their child, the baby Richard had tried to use as leverage, the pregnancy that had once felt like a complication, now felt like the perfect completion of their family. "What do you think our little engineer will invent?" Amara asked. "Knowing the parents, probably something that will change the world," Khalil replied, then kissed her temple. "But even if they just grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally, that will be achievement enough." Later that night, as they lay in their overwater bungalow listening to the gentle lap of waves beneath them, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman whose husband had abandoned her for someone better. Now she was a successful engineer, a loving wife, an expectant mother, and a woman who'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's opinion. "Khalil," she whispered in the darkness. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing in my dreams when I'd stopped believing. For showing me that broken people really can heal each other if they're brave enough to try." He pulled her closer, his voice soft with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me that trust isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing love despite the fear. For showing me that some risks are worth taking, some walls are worth tearing down, and some people are worth fighting for." Outside their window, the Maldivian waters sparkled under a canopy of stars, and somewhere in the distance, children who'd never had clean water before were falling asleep with full stomachs and hope for tomorrow. Their technology hummed quietly in facilities around the world, a testament to what was possible when brilliant minds combined with generous hearts. But in their small paradise, Amara and Khalil held each other close and dreamed about the future they were building together. A future where love conquered fear, where broken people found healing, where dreams came true for those brave enough to fight for them. And in the morning, they would wake up ready to change the world again, one drop of clean water, one act of love, one impossible dream at a time. This concludes our emotional journey, a story of love lost and found, dreams threatened and saved, and two wounded souls who discovered that sometimes the most broken people are exactly what each other needs to become whole again. From abandonment to triumph, from despair to joy, Amara and Khalil's story reminds us that with courage, determination, and love, even the most damaged hearts can find their way to happiness. What did you think of Amara and Khalil's journey? Have you ever had to fight for something you believed in, even when everyone else doubted you? Share your thoughts about second chances, true partnership, and the courage to love again despite past hurts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more intriguing stories.